Okay, so it's already 11 a.m. So good morning, everyone. To the World Bank Research Seminar Series in collaboration with Monash University and Bank Negara, Malaysia. Today we have the honor to have Suojing Lian, who is a senior economist at Data Analytics and Research Unit at Bank Negara, Malaysia. And he will present his work on the plucking model of the unemployment rate floor, cross-country estimates and empirics. So as usual, we have 1 hour. Feel free to ask questions. And thanks a lot for being here, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Augustine, and the organizing team. So this seminar will be about Friedman's plucking model of the business cycle. It really is an extension of last year's paper. That was also recently just published in the Singapore Economic Review. So this one takes it a bit further. The previous paper was more of a focused discussion on Malaysian application of Malaysia as a proof of concept. Now we extend this to a panel of advanced and emerging economies and extend it to the unemployment rate as well, rather than real GDP. So we'll talk about two things in essence. One, how to estimate the plucking model of the unemployment rate floor and by extension unemployment rate gap in a way that is useful and applicable for macroeconomic surveillance, so usable in policy settings. And secondly, we explore its empirical properties and what that says about policy, how policymakers should think about the business cycle. All right. So unlike traditional symmetric view of the business cycle, where upturns and downturns rather symmetric, away from a trend in the sort of in between, cutting across all the fluctuations in output of the unemployment rate. That's the view that economists are generally familiar with. The plucking model, the plucking view, which is really based on Friedman's 1964 and subsequently 1993 papers, really begins from empirical properties, right? Observed properties, long-term properties in the business cycle. What Friedman showed with US GNP data is that the amplitudes, so the size of expansions and the subsequent contractions are unrelated. So in T0, you have an expansion, and in T+1, you have a contraction, but the sizes are unrelated, the amplitudes are unrelated. But the opposite is true, right? You have a deep contraction, the subsequent expansion will be much stronger. So these are the two plucking properties, right? And others have also replicated these findings in output and also unemployment rate in some of the advanced economies. You can see it from the first bullet point. What this paper does is that we focus on the unemployment rate, which really builds on recent discussion, Dupran Ackerman Steinson's 2019 paper, that the unemployment rate is the variable that displays best the plucking properties, at least in the US. So we take this further, look at it from a global perspective, a reasonably representative panel of advanced and emerging economies. So the plucking model essentially says that for the unemployment rate, it should hover at or above some floor and is occasionally plucked up. So by adverse shocks, so recessions, crisis, and so on, before it creeps back towards the steady state, so that floor again. Generally, in the output sense, it would be the opposite. You have an output ceiling. Output is generally around that ceiling, and occasionally you have a shock. It gets plucked down and then rebounds fairly quickly towards that ceiling again. Whereas in the traditional view, you have upturns and downturns. Occasionally, on average, it evens out at output gap equals 0 and at trend, right? Or averages are trend. So for policymakers, there are really two questions there. Is the unemployment rate floor really useful? Is it usable as a policy toolkit, as a surveillance toolkit? For that to happen, it needs to be computationally simple and reliable, not prone to retrospective revisions as well, right? And secondly, does it matter for policy? So if you say that business cycles are asymmetric, does it matter anyway? If it doesn't change the policy decision calculus, optimal policy strategies remain the same, really doesn't matter. Then we're just discussing this for purely academic purposes, right? Okay, so I'll make 4 points in the rest of the seminar here. The first is that I'll show that across 19 advanced and emerging economies, major advanced and emerging economies, the unemployment rate generally demonstrates the plucking properties very well, right? The secondly is that we can estimate the unemployment rate floor in a computationally simple way that is usable for real-time surveillance. Real-time meaning you get one new data point, you update your estimates, the retrospective revisions are insubstantial. That is to say that moving from t to t+1, your information about t and t-1 all the way back to t0 hasn't really changed much. So you are getting the right picture from a policy perspective throughout time, right? All the way until t equals to large T, right? So third, I'll show that applying this to the perennial Phillips curve relationship, so the trade-off between inflation and output, inflation, unemployment, that trade-off, although small, it does become even smaller. So the Phillips curve relationship is there, but small, and it becomes even smaller when the unemployment rate is further away from the floor, meaning to say when economic slack is wider, the Phillips curve relationship flattens even further, right? But it's still there, although fairly small. Then the last thing is that really more so for policy decisions, right? Do shocks propagate differently? Policy shocks and other economic shocks, do they propagate differently when the unemployment rate is at the unemployment rate floor, meaning when slack equals to 0 or when slack greater than 0, does it change the way shocks propagate in the macroeconomy, right? So that should determine how policymakers should respond to shocks and what shocks to respond to as well.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. How did you choose this sample?
So we look at we try to cover as many regions as possible. So you have the Americas, Asia Pacific, largely the major advanced and emerging economies. So look at GDP, the relative size of the GDP relative to world GDP.
Okay.
So how economically significant they are to the economy.
We're just clarifying question. You're estimating the unemployment rate floor of t+1 using data from t, or is it just t? You're estimating the unemployment floor at t using t.
At t using t.
At t using t.
So when you are in t+1, you have information in t+1. You use that new information as well.
Okay.
Estimate from t0 to t+1.
All right.
And incrementally as well. So it's not a forecasting exercise.
Okay. So like no Markov processes, not.
Okay. So so before we get to estimating the unemployment rate floor, we want to show that the plucking properties do exist. If these two properties don't hold, there's no the presentation solve ends here. There's no paper to be discussed, right? So property number one, the current contraction and the subsequent expansion are related, and that is the case. So you have on the vertical axis on the left-hand side chart, the red chart, the amplitude of the subsequent expansion t+1, and the x-axis the size of the contraction. So the wider the larger, the deeper the contraction, right? So change in unemployment from its trough, from the change in unemployment is larger, right? So unemployment rises, say, by 10 basis points, 10 percentage points. Then the subsequent expansion will also be as wide. So the subsequent expansion also, in the subsequent expansion, the unemployment rate also falls by a fairly similar amount. Right? So that's property one. Property two is that the current expansion should have no bearing whatsoever on the subsequent contraction. So no matter how good the current boom is, the next bust shouldn't have any relationship with that. So this property is actually antithetical to the traditional view. In the traditional view, you have a very nice upturn, right? So that should build up a lot of vulnerabilities. The economy goes in overheating mode, and consequently, the subsequent contraction should also be substantially larger. Right? Should also be proportionate. But that's not the case here across the 19 economies that we use. We have also done some sensitivity checks using the Q-on-Q as a change instead of amplitude. You get fairly similar results as well in terms of amplitude, in terms of slopes, and also the dispersion of the observations. So how do we go about estimating the unemployment rate floor then? So there's a fairly good there's a fairly good methodology that we can begin
And
working
by
from.
unemployment rate flow, you mean that unemployment rate can never go below that in the economy, basically?
Yeah, so it's not like the steady state or maximum employment. Yeah, so it's the Pareto efficient level of unemployment. So to do this, we first need to identify when the peaks and troughs are, right? And the way we go about this is that we simply take the algorithm used in Duprat, Nakamura, and Steinson. What essentially they did is that to identify peaks are really defined as, if the unemployment rate has decreased by consistently for a sustained period of time down to a level that is sufficiently low, then you declare that as a peak. And you do the opposite is the case for troughs as well. There's sufficient jump in the unemployment rate as you move across, right? So
Clarifying question, what is sufficient in this context?
So you determine a threshold, you calibrate the threshold country by country. So for instance, in Duprat, Nakamura, and Steinson, they did this for the US. So let's say if unemployment rate today is at 3%, right? And to declare a trough, you go on and on until you find an observation that exceeds a particular threshold. So I think it's about 1 or something, so 1 percentage point increase. And in the subsequent periods as well, you see no higher observations beyond that point.
So this 1% is exogenous or is also
it's calibrated country by country.
Okay.
Yeah. So how they did is they calibrated that number for the US and then compared it against the NBER's peaks and troughs.
Okay.
And to see if they fit roughly, the known peaks and troughs in the US context. So we do the same for the 19 economies here. So each economy will have a different tolerance threshold because each unemployment rate fluctuates fairly differently. But you should be able to get, if you know that you have the calibration correct when you are able to match the general peaks. You are able to identify the general known peaks and troughs in that economy. Okay, so once you have applied the DNS Duprat, Nakamura, Steinson algorithm, then you take on the approach that was used in my previous paper. You interpolate between the peaks, the identified peaks. So essentially using a spline, it's fairly simple, and then you extrapolate the endpoints using the average change in the neighboring phase. After that, you apply restriction, just a definitional restriction that unemployment rate should never be below the unemployment rate floor. If that's the case, very simply, you have you assume that the unemployment rate floor is the actual unemployment rate. So there's some debate when the paper was drafted. Should the floor really fluctuate, and should it be tied to inflation? Right? Generally, you would if you use time series filters, if you apply it through a Kalman filter, you have a Phillips curve that governs where potential output is. So I think it's fairly intuitive also. One rebuttal we gave is that fairly intuitive for structural measures like the unemployment floor or the output, potential output, for instance, to remain fairly stable over time. So the degree of fluctuation should be fairly minimal in the short term. So if you're removing the cyclical component from a variable, the trend component should be fairly simple anyway. And secondly, it should also still allow for some gentle fluctuations. And I think that's what the peak trough identification does. It allows for that gentle fluctuation over a long period of time, right? To be able to trace business cycles, peaks and troughs. And in terms of inflation, we also want to study the Phillips curve relationship. It would be problematic if you have a Phillips curve relationship built in the first place, where you assume that the unemployment rate floor is ex ante linked to inflation already, then you can't really study it its properties exposed. So we abstract ourselves from inflation so that we can get a cleaner analysis of the Phillips curve relationship later on. Okay, So, so once we apply this methodology to all 19 economies, how do they look like, right? So I've grouped the countries here by into four categories. The major advanced economies, so like Australia, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, US. The major emerging economies, so Brazil, Chile, China, India, Mexico. The newly industrialized economies in Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, SAR, and Korea. And then the ASEAN emerging economies, the ASEAN 4, so including Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. So how does the unemployment floor look like, right? So generally, it fits what Friedman describes, right? The actual unemployment rate is generally at or hovers above the unemployment rate floor, and occasionally you have major economic shocks like the GFC, COVID, or some domestic ones in Brazil's case, 2016 recession. These kind of shocks will pluck the unemployment rate up away from that floor, and that floor will still generally be stable. It traces some long-term business cycle shape, something like that, and eventually converges back towards that floor, right?
And this dashed line is supposed to be the floor.
Yeah, the dashed line is the floor.
And why is it that for certain countries it's so upward sloping? Let's say if you look at a Mexico or a China.
Yep.
Yeah. And is there some kind of intuition there why there are much more sharper movements in flows because you would assume that the flow depends on kind of like the institutional structure or the technological structure in the economy.
Yep.
And it's not so clear why. I'm just wondering why in Mexico or China has such a sharp one as compared to somebody like a Brazil, for instance, or
yeah, that's a fair point. I haven't got
like Japan. You would think again it's kind of like a So this just try to understand how do we think about validating some things like such a flowed measure that you come up with through your calibration Excel, because I couldn't see how the model is written down to be able to think about what's the process that underlies this calculation,
Yeah. I haven't done the decomposition of why, the external determinants of why you have unemployment rate floor that trends upwards or downwards. So we can think of it as, say, if it's we shall discuss a bit later for the US context, it may be reflecting supply factors, so changes in labor force participation, changes in global commodity prices, your commodity price shocks that affects the supply frontier, and then you can see that how that unemployment rate floor also traces, at least for the US. So not really a formal discussion in this paper, but certainly worth looking into. So it could be institutions, as you say, could also be just general. In Japan's case, it may be demographic change over long term.
But completely looks contrary to Italy, which you could argue has similar demographic changes to Japan, no?
Yeah, but Italy also has a totally different problem with the fiscal situation, which Japan has a different context.
But
So you fit the quadratic spline for each peak, right? So you use the points locally for each peak only for each spline?
Yeah, the peaks only.
Okay, so only the local points around the thing to fit the.
So we apply quadratic spline on all the peaks in one go. So if that's what you're referring to.
Wait, so if you apply it across the whole thing, then you can't fit it with quadratic, right? It has to be a higher.
Yeah. So locally, yeah.
Locally, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
so intuitively, what is the idea of this unemployment floor? Because I was thinking that it's more like a stationary unemployment rate, but it doesn't look really stationary. Like it fluctuates a lot, no? In the way that you are estimating.
I mean, we can't read the y-axis, but looks like it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it fluctuates quite a bit because it should trace that the peaks and troughs.
But why intuitively why it should trace that?
So it could be changes in supply, aggregate supply conditions.
No, but if you tell me that it's a stationary unemployment rate, in the long term there are no these fluctuations.
But you said it's like a steady state, right?
Exactly. Yeah, steady state. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll think of it as so steady state can move. So if you have potential So if you abstract yourself away from your unemployment rate.
No, but the steady state by definition
potential output.
doesn't move over the cycle.
Exactly.
That's
You
the
can agree
definition.
that the steady state, you could have, jumps into a new steady state, but these are like drastic changes in some senses as we think of them, right?
Exactly.
I'll actually tend to disagree. I don't think the steady state, it has, if you're looking at it, say the US over a horizon of 50 years or 70 years, that the steady state can change over the long run as well. So you have structural changes in the structural makeup of the economy. Intuitively, that should change as well. Where the steady state is should change, right? It shouldn't remain. Remain at, say, a particular fixed percentage point at it.
Yeah, but partially, so for instance, think about capital labor ratios. We think that's why there's so much that has moved by a few percentage points, but there's a huge debate as to why it's moved, because we think of it as a steady state concept that remains constant over long periods of time. And that's why even a few percentage points leads to a huge generation of trying to understand why the steady state changes. I'm saying just conceptually speaking, that might be worth thinking about it harder, in some sense.
Yeah. Fair point. So if I will agree with you, if it's say very locally, right, you shouldn't have violent jumps. And I think that's fair. But if you look at the charts here, for the red lines, they don't generally move a lot within a few years, horizon of a few years.
And what's the time frame on the x-axis?
Fairly different for different countries. So
okay.
let's say for the US, you have for Malaysia, it's much shorter, say about 10 years. For the US, you have all the way back to the post-World War II period.
Okay.
UK, it starts in the 1970s. So over the long term, generally, it moves, right? I think that's fair. So the demographic makeup in 1970, the UK is fairly different from year 2000 and also now. Likewise in the US. And along the way, you have different policy regulation as well. Different the way banks are regulated, the way the different labor market reforms are implemented. So all of those, I think it should change that. Should change where the trend unemployment rate should be. So think of it as a labor supply, right? Labor supply, a steady state labor supply, it can change based on, say, oil price shock and so on. So yes,
I was just asking the same question slightly different. If I'm a policymaker, right, why should I worry about the dotted red line? And like the Chinese finance minister and the Indian finance minister meets. Do they have something to talk about, based on this red line? Like, is it the case that China need to worry about higher long-run unemployment compared to India? Is that what this is saying? Again, what is the intuition for the policymaker with this unemployment floor?
Yeah, so
is that like potential employment over the business cycle or something like that?
Yeah, so from a structural policy perspective, yes, I would say that's the right angle. But I think for the remainder of the paper, we're more focused on the gap between the red line and the black line. So for monetary policy, how do you go about how do you go about closing this gap in the short term?
Okay, so the gap between the red line and the black line, is that so I interpret the red line as potential employment in the short term, right?
Yeah.
So you can explain the gap, but then the trend, if the red line trend is going upwards, is that worrisome as well, that in the long run I'm going to have higher unemployment in my economy?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if you're going at it from a structural policy perspective, yeah, I think that's an intuitive conclusion. But I don't think we haven't gone about decomposing what determines that red line. I think there's a reasonably rich literature out there as well. So you have things like types of labor market reforms, how liberal your labor market is, the degree of unionization. So all of those should determine demographics as well. All of that should determine where the red line goes and where the red line is. Yep.
Sorry, just to jump on this discussion. So the estimated floor of unemployment, should I interpret that as the natural unemployment rate, or is it because I think what you mentioned earlier about the interest of this paper is really to measure the, I guess, like the shock in a sense, the gap between the black line and the red line, which could be, I would interpret the red line slightly differently in that sense, because that would not necessarily mean the natural unemployment rate, which is like the steady state for, I guess, the country.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I'll go into the distinction between the floor and the natural rate in the subsequent. So let's just go there straight away. The subsequent slides actually just talk about degree of retrospective revision, minimal. Now, so the difference between NAIRU, so natural, the commonly understood natural rate, really the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, right? So for this, we use the US because the CBO is tiny. So to the best of my knowledge, it's not the only one that has a consistent long enough time series that is publicly available, and also have made the methodology open access. So the NAIRU is really the rate of unemployment in which inflation is non-accelerating. So that's what we know about the natural, commonly understand what is natural rate. The unvariable floor is conceptually distinct. It is the theoretical maximum. So as I've discussed just now, very briefly, the Pareto efficient rate of unemployment. So you have all resources, given your resource constraint, this is supposedly the maximum you should be producing at. Do they need to be, conceptually, should they be at different levels? Not necessarily. So if you have in a world without frictions, your non-inflation accelerating level is indeed the floor. But that's not the case. So intuitively, you think that the floor should be somewhere lower than the, the other way around. The floor should be somewhere higher than the, So the output ceiling, in the output sense, it should be somewhere higher than the non-inflation accelerating natural output. In the unemployment rate sense, the natural rate should be somewhere higher than the theoretical maximum. So, and in the US, when we plot against the CBO's estimate of the NAIRU, that is the case. So the blue line is the CBO's estimate of the NAIRU. I think they use a production function approach with time series filters. And we plot the rate of the actual unemployment rate. So that's the black line from 1947 all the way until 23. The red line is my estimate of the US unemployment rate floor. The blue line is the CBO's estimate of the NAIRU. And for most of the time, you have the red line indeed below the blue line. So theoretical maximum rate of unemployment is lower, right? So at maximum employment, the rate of unemployment should be lower than the rate of unemployment that corresponds to zero accelerating inflation. So zero change in inflation, right? E plus 1 minus T.
And conceptually, we should expect this, that NAIRU has much less variance than your theoretical flow. Wouldn't you think it must almost be the other way around? Maybe I'm just thinking out loud.
So so there's a perennial debate on how to estimate NAIRU. No one can agree on it.
No, but I'm saying as a concept, which one, according to you, has more?
I don't think you can say that from this paper. You probably need to do a survey of all the different methodologies to. Granted, the ways, the methods that have been deployed to estimate the NAIRU is much richer, and also no one can agree. There are some methodologies, like say if you use a Phillips curve, if you apply a common filter on a Phillips curve and IS equation, you get a potential output estimate that fluctuates quite a bit. If you use HP filtered, if you apply a structural equation like say Cobb-Douglas production function, fairly commonly used with HP filtered labor, HP filtered capital, you get a fairly stable equation, fairly stable blue line like this. So it really depends on how you want to estimate it. And there's no agreement which one should then demonstrate greater variance. Yeah.
So how should I interpret episodes where, I think you mentioned this earlier, but I could really understand. Like the episodes where NAIRU is above the unemployment rate floor. Like, I usually think about the NAIRU as the literal bottom, but then if the U rate is the theoretical maximum, like what is the situation of the labor market that would lead to that episode where the natural employment rate is actually lower than the floor?
Yeah, during this period of time, you have a fairly large. So this is late 1970s, early 1980s, somewhere here. Yeah. So that corresponds to the 1973 OPEC crisis, the aftermath of that, and then also the Iran-Iraq war. So both of these events generated very substantial oil price shocks. So that may have that may have reduced the supply frontier. Hence, we have an increase in the red line, but the non-inflation accelerating point hasn't changed much. Could be that. Yeah. So I'll skip this. So yeah. So let's go through point one, right? So now that we're up on the spike in the 1970s and 80s. So to relate this then to recent discussion on, say, the global supply shocks, we can visually compare the estimated unemployment rate floor against different metrics of supply shocks, right? Supply conditions, right? So two priors. One, if you think of oil price shocks as a supply shock, then when you have substantial oil price shocks, it should be accompanied by an increase in the floor, right? So the steady state increase, you have a decrease in the supply bound, so the unemployment floor goes up. If an increase in labor supply, on the other hand, should be accompanied by a decline in the unemployment floor, right? So this is not a formal analysis, but fairly sort of like to motivate. You may be able to discuss the contextualize the unemployment rate floor, output ceiling in the previous paper, in the context of a sort of a metric for aggregate supply conditions. So we plot the chart you saw just now, the US unemployment rate floor, and the NAIRU, right, against the yellow line, which is a proxy for oil price shocks. So this is taken directly from Hamilton's 1996 paper, net oil increase. There's another paper subsequently in 2020 that changed changed it to max oil, no difference. What it essentially does is that it shows up as non-zero when the maximum, the highest point, so when today's oil price is much higher, substantially higher than the maximum, the highest point observed in the previous year. So let's say in the previous year, the highest point of oil price is about $85 per barrel. And then today's oil price is 100, let's say it hits 100. Then the max oil indicator will show up as 15. So that's how it's 15 if you don't divide it by, don't convert into percentage points, right? Into percentage change. So what it shows here is that the 1970s, the spike in the red line also corresponded with the two largest oil price shocks, specifically 1973, the Yom Kippur War, and also the Iran-Iraq War and the Iranian Revolution. So these two major oil price shocks corresponded with that increase, the upward trend in the unemployment rate floor. Now, in the 2000s, you have successive oil price shocks, so troubles in the Middle East, right? And that corresponded with a turnaround in unemployment rate floor. So this is purely from a surveillance point of view, right? There's no formal discussion here, right? In 2021, you have COVID, logistic constraints arising from COVID, the reopening, and how China's supply chain couldn't keep up, and then subsequently the Ukraine-Russia war. But there's obviously some trends in some of the changes in the red line that couldn't really be accounted for by the yellow line. That's really the 1950s. But we've changed gears. We move on to comparing this against the labor force. So yellow line now is the US labor force participation rate, and it sort of explains a bit the trend you see in the 1950s, right? You have, despite the lack of oil price shocks, the unemployment floor actually trended upwards against a decline in the labor force participation rate. And similarly also in the year 2000, but for that I find the oil price shocks explanation a bit slightly more convincing. Now again, this is not a formal analysis, so to do this you may want to apply like a regression approach analysis to decompose the red line into different types of supply factors, and then that would explain what determines a red line over time.
You're using Hamilton's index, right? Why do you choose to use Hamilton's index against, let's say, Killian's index?
Oh, just familiarity.
Just familiarity.
There's no reason why.
Because if you're using Hamilton's index, that means you're ignoring all of the negative price shocks, right?
Agree.
Which could potentially alter the unemployment floor, as you say.
Yeah.
Because it's an opposite. It may not be asymmetric. It might be symmetric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, no reason not to do that.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so that's the brief discussion on supply shocks. So let's get back to the Phillips curve. So for policymakers, for central banks especially, we're more interested in the inflation, managing the inflation and employment trade-off. So it would matter for policy if being at the unemployment rate floor or above the unemployment rate floor changes the relationship between inflation and unemployment. Right. So to this, we estimate a hybrid Phillips curve, forward and backward looking, with fixed effects right? So left hand side you have inflation, you have core inflation, and then you have a fixed country fixed effects, the change in unemployment, year-on-year change in unemployment rate, expected inflation. So this is a weighted average of consensus forecast of 12 months ahead inflation, and then the lack of core inflation itself. And optionally, we also include the RER since a lot of our countries are small open economies, even though rather important components of the global economy, still trade dependent. So we include that to account for the exchange rate pass-through, right? So that's the baseline equation. So vanilla hybrid Phillips curve. Now to ask whether the unemployment floor matters, we interact the unemployment rate term. So supposedly beta 1 here now multiplied by U plus the unemployment rate gap, meaning to say actual unemployment rate minus the floor, and then interact these two variables, that's beta 3. So the slope of the Phillips curve then is beta 1 plus beta 3 multiplied by the unemployment rate gap, right? So what we want to see is if the estimates for beta 3 has any economic significance, and likewise also as a baseline whether beta 1 is has economically significant value, right? So now I'm showing here the estimates of equation 1. So the first equation, the vanilla Phillips curve on the left hand side with the RER included as a control. So the RER is Z, pi k minus 1 is lag inflation, E pi is the expected inflation, and UT is unemployment rate. On the right hand side, you have two more rows, the unemployment rate gap on its own, and then the interaction between unemployment rate and unemployment rate gap. So these are 95% confidence intervals, and the point estimate is on the first column. So I'll draw attention to only 3 rows here. On the left hand side, the vanilla estimate, right? The coefficient on the unemployment rate, so that's your slope of the Phillips curve, is economically significant. So it's statistically significant, but it's fairly small. So a 1 percentage point change in the unemployment rate corresponds to about 0.05 change in the inflation, in core inflation. So not really that substantial. So this sort of agrees with the latest literature. So I think Hazel et al. Has a very popular, fairly impactful paper recently using US state level inflation price data, and they found that there is a slope in the Phillips curve that is sloped, but it's really small and hasn't really changed much. So that's what they found. And on the right hand side, when you interact it with unemployment rate gap, the term on the coefficient on the unemployment rate, so beta 1, retains its statistical significance, and you have a positive coefficient on the interacted term, which is also statistically significant. So what this means is that you have a small slope in the Phillips curve that is in the theoretically correct direction, but as the unemployment rate goes further away from the unemployment rate gap, that slope becomes flatter, even flatter, so it gets even closer to 0, right? So what this means for policymakers, so very fairly simple. When policy is easing, so presumably during when economic slack is above 0, the rate of easing should be faster, right? Because the inflation and unemployment trade-off is much smaller now. But it should be faster, and it should be much more aggressive than tightening cycles when the inflation unemployment relationship is still there. So what does this actually mean in context, right? So we apply this equation onto the unemployment rate data across our 19 economies. Some of them are omitted. I think, yeah, Indonesia is omitted because they did not have quarterly quarterly unemployment rate, but the rest are retained. And what it shows is that so the degree of flattening is during downturns is substantial but not complete, right? So there are almost no instances where the Phillips curve relationship has completely disappeared across the 19 economies, except in two specific points. The US in the second quarter of 2020, and also in the Philippines, also in the second quarter of 2020. So and Brazil as well. So these are the three. So second quarter 2020 was also when the COVID lockdowns were the most severe. And beyond that, you don't actually see the complete disappearance of the Phillips curve slope, right? It does flatten, but varying degrees, 20 to 50% at most across all countries. And for most economies, except the US, Brazil, and Philippines, COVID really wasn't that substantially different. The degree of flattening in the Phillips curve really was similar to previous downturns as well. So nothing too different there. Okay, so this is a bunch of robustness checks, so to say. Use a pool OLS instead of EAPCE. Excluded Malaysia, Brazil, and India. These three countries have insufficient coverage pre-GFC. So for instance, Malaysia's unemployment rate data, quarterly frequency started in 2015 or so. So we excluded that. Excluding these three countries, you still get quantitatively similar estimates, small beta 1, positive beta 3, and all statistically significant. In some cases, actually increases the degree of precision as well. So the confidence bands become smaller. Exclude the RER, you get larger beta 1, beta 3 estimates, possibly omitted variable bias. And then separately, so it could be the case, one comment that was brought up previously is that, not in this seminar, that how much of that change in the Phillips curve relationship is actually coming from external factors. So it is the control for US unemployment rate and unemployment rate gap separately, instead of including it as part of the panel. I also use interaction term. And you get fairly similar results as well. And then could there be non-linearities in the estimates? Square terms, triple interaction as well. The non-linear terms are small and imprecise, so we drop them, meaning to say the linear specification is probably the parsimonious one is probably fine. Alternatively, there's also a threshold regression that's implemented. So instead of interacting with the unemployment rate gap, we estimate a threshold model to see if there is a particular point in which the change in the trend is in the slope is if there exists such a point, right? And we did, and it's fairly, it's about 1.33 percentage points above the unemployment rate floor. So dummy threshold regression implemented as well. Quantitatively, same findings. And then last check we did is that does the plucking model, the unemployment floor model, does it explain the data better than if you had just used NAIRU, traditional unemployment rate gap? And the answer is that yeah, it does, at least for the US, right? The plucking model, Phillips curve estimates show better model fit. So much smaller AIC, corrected AIC, and also larger log likelihood. The coefficient of the NAIRU gap also was fairly small, so potentially also unrelated with inflation. So it's a fairly recent discussion, fits with fairly recent discussion that you have a bunch of ways to estimate the unemployment rate trend and the potential output, but in the end, the resultant output gap and unemployment gap aren't really that related with inflation. So what are you exactly estimating, right?
Sorry, one question. How new is this finding? Because what I'm understanding about this unemployment floor is that basically it's like a stationary state measure of the unemployment rate that is most sensible to fluctuations in the short run, which is different from the natural unemployment rate, right?
Yeah.
So of course, if you ask me which one gonna fit the data better, I mean, it's gonna be the one that take into account the business cycle fluctuations.
Okay.
So is this like a novel finding? Is something that is already well documented in the literature? Because I would expect that is something that by definition will hold.
I think formal documentation isn't that extensive yet, but there are discussion that the Phillips curve relationship is not really that substantial. So drawing from Hazel et al. So I think that really is the point which triggered this discussion. But discussing it in terms of the output gap, the unemployment rate gap, it's not too well documented yet.
Okay.
But it's to policymakers, it should be quite intuitive. Yeah, if you have been looking at these metrics for quite some time. Yeah. Just formal documentations. But yeah, so fair point. So I think useful for further research could be to look at, say, comparing this against a suite of NAIRU estimates, NAIRU gap estimates, so that can have a much fairer comparison there. Okay. So the last part, does it actually matter for propagation of shocks, right? Including policy shocks. So for this, we estimate a panel local projections model, a threshold panel local projections model. So similar to a threshold VAR, panel threshold VAR, you have an endogenous block. We have private sector debt. So this from the BIS, credit/debt channel. Real GDP, output channel, inflation, short-term interest rates. So that's the proxy for monetary policy. Real exchange rate and expected inflation to deal with potential, the expectations channel. Right? And you have an exogenous block which covers oil prices and uncertainty shocks. Right? The threshold variable is whether the unemployment rate gap is at 0, meaning the unemployment rate is at unemployment rate floor, or the unemployment rate is above the unemployment rate floor. So to do this, we have, once you implement this model, you get two sets of IRFs, impulse response functions. One set for when the unemployment rate is at floor, and one set for when the unemployment rate is above the floor. Right? We've ordered the variables at the bottom as well. So that responds with a lag to all other shocks. Expected inflation responds contemporaneously to all other shocks. Okay, we don't have to look at the left-hand side. It's just there for completeness. The key findings are on the right-hand side. So as far as policy shocks are concerned, interest rate shocks do display some non-linearity. So when the unemployment rate floor binds, interest rate shocks negatively impact core inflation. So as expected, this inflationary effect when the unemployment rate floor binds. But the policy shocks don't have that quite the effects of the impact of interest rate shocks hovers around 0 if the unemployment rate floor is above the floor. So meaning say when there's economic slack, the disinflationary effect of interest rate shocks is much smaller than if economic slack is binding, right? And there's no economic slack. You get the same impact profile for expected inflation as well. No surprises there. Now, the impact of interest rate shocks on GDP growth is relatively small, but in both regimes. But the timing of the peak impact is different. So it's earlier when the unemployment rate floor binds, and later when the unemployment rate floor when it doesn't bind. That and exchange rate exhibit very little non-linearity there. When you abstract yourself away from policy shocks, interest rate shocks, output and price shocks also exhibit a bit of regime switches. So for policymakers, what does this mean, right? So at a high level, there are 2 points to note. One, so how policy, what and how policymakers should react to. So what shocks when you have, say, a supply shock, or say you have a recession rising from the weaker external demand. How policymakers should respond to that should differ on whether there's economic slack or not. So it does matter. And secondly, when policymakers do want to implement unanticipated policy changes, so let's say the central bank wants to surprise the market with an interest rate hike, they should also then take into account the size of whether the unemployment rate floor, whether the unemployment rate is at the unemployment rate floor or not. Or abstracting yourself away from that, whether there's economic slack or not. Fairly simple. Okay, so to conclude then, let's walk through four questions, right? One, is there a basis for the plucking model? Why are we discussing this in the first place? Much earlier on, we showed that real world data does demonstrate the plucking properties fairly well in the unemployment rate. So yeah, there is basis for it. Is surveillance possible? We breezed through this, but the estimates of the plucking, the unemployment rate floor, they display fairly little retrospective revisions across countries. So yeah, and it's really easy to compute this. It's all computational, right? So that makes it trackable in real time. Whereas if you use time series filters to estimate more the traditional estimates of the unemployment, the NERU, this type of estimates tend to be more prone to retrospective revisions unless you're using a one-sided filter, which mechanically removes that possibility. Now, does it matter for policy? Yes. The Phillips curve analysis shows that policy easing cycles should be faster, should be more aggressive than tightening cycles. The local projections analysis also show that policy behavior should choose what to respond to and how to respond to shocks differently, depending on whether the unemployment rate is at the floor or not. So yeah, so matters for policy, right? Well, now what's next? I think yeah.
Sorry, just kind of question here because I think this is an interesting point. So when the Phillips curve is flat, it means that there is no too much scope for policy, right?
There's no inflation cost for policy.
There's no inflation cost, or there is no space for policy to actually activate unemployment, or is the opposite?
So there's growth
without inflation cost.
Okay, yeah. So I think so if you look at so point 3, the interest rate shocks still have an impact on output, right? But the timing of the peak impact, only the timing of the peak impact differs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the inflation effect of that policy change will be smaller when the unemployment rate is further away from the floor.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So what's next? I think it is what I find about this line of this subfield, nascent field, is that a lot of the research is generally very empirical, except for Duprat-Nakamura sciences, which really started empirical as well, but they also provided a sort of like neo-Keynesian model to how to replicate the unemployment rate trends in the US. But there's only so much empirical analysis can do. You will eventually need to move across into theoretical macro theory to understand the welfare implications of different counterfactual policy regimes. And I think that's really the next step. What does this, how, if central banks were to change the policy calculus to account for the asymmetry in the business cycle, would it generate substantially different welfare effects? Okay. Thank you. That's it.
So I have a question. You're looking at the experience in the US during, after COVID and whatnot. I think there was some debates and discussion about how the inflation and unemployment rates are not behaving accordingly or to previous models, during periods of high inflation, unemployment rate. Yeah, I completely forgot what the situation was, but the general conclusion was that they're not behaving properly or something was going on there. And the question is whether this model, the plucking model, can be used to explain some of that scenarios and how things unveil during the post-COVID period.
I think that's so. You may want to go back to somewhere here or here, possibly, but I don't think we can make solid claims without say. I think the right way to do this really is to adapt a well-known neo-Keynesian model, fairly simple one. Adapt some of its deep parameters or assumptions, behavior of households, so that you can replicate the plucking properties in your simulated data, and then you try and understand what could be explained, what could be causing the difference in pre-COVID and post-COVID inflationary response. But just from these two charts, I think it may be the extent of structural changes in the makeup of the economy. So cost factor is substantially, TFP is lower, maybe. The labor force participation is permanently lower than the pre-COVID trend. That could be as well. Yeah. There's also, I think, sort of related discussion. It's a fairly recent paper, I think. Forgot who. But what they did was that Move, I think, party Move. They use the neo-Keynesian model to theorize that you have a supply shock, massive supply shock that decreases the massive supply shock that increases inflation, right? It also decreases the supply frontiers of potential output goes down, but at the same time, there is the contractionary monetary policy that's being implemented, and what that generated is it made investments harder. So cost of borrowing is higher. So it deterred investment to recover, to push that potential output back to trend. So then you have an net inflationary effect as well. So it could be that.
Any other question? If not, I have one. If you have to explain your mom how the unemployment floor, this unemployment floor helps to take better policy decisions, monetary policy decisions, what would you say to your mom? I don't want equations or estimations.
Yeah. That's a good point. So basically, I'll couch it as this, right? But with this, policymakers can make decisions in a way that much better reflects, how recessions and how the economy moves over time. So we can make more precise policy and a much more precise in a much more precise manner. I'll just put it aside.
Okay.
Yeah. So better policy.
Anything else? Online? Is there any question online? Okay, so I think thanks a lot. Thank you for such an interesting presentation, and see you next week. We have a speaker from NUS, so hopefully see you next week. Okay, thank you very much.